Right, so hi everyone, welcome to Secure, Quick, Reliable Login, SQRL. My name's Liam. These are the places you can find me. You can email me here, me at liam.raper.me.uk, or you can go to my website. I'm on Twitter, don't use it very much. LinkedIn is a very good way to find me for this sort of stuff. And this is my GitHub tag, which will link you to some of the stuff we're going to be talking about today. I'm a software developer with a focus on cybersecurity. I work for Pierbridge, who are owned by WiseTech Global. Anything I say here is my own opinion and not that WiseTech's or Pierbridge's stance on the things. I have to say that for legal reasons. So in today's talk, we're going to cover what SQRL is. We'll do a live demo. Then we're going to talk about why it's good for the users. The technical side, so we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into Squirrel, not too much, don't worry, I'm not going to test you on this. Just it helps explain kind of the security behind the protocol. And then we're going to have a quick look at how you can implement this in your .NET applications, but other applications as well, because there's lots of stuff out there. So, SQRL, Secure, Quick, Reliable Login, also pronounced Squirrel, as Kevin's been pronouncing it, hence the logo, was very recently invented, thought of, brainchild of Steve Gibson, who is a well-known and respected, mostly, in the industries of cybersecurity, for he kind of discovered the first worm, things like that. So yeah, he thought about how can login be made easier, better, more user-friendly, and still keep the security. So he came up with Squirrel in about 2015, last couple of years, well, no, 5 years now. It's been a long time. It's been kind of reviewed, what he's thought of, tested, kind of, and then last year it kind of finished the specification, and a lot of developers have picked it up and run with it, and we've got to where we are now, where we've got working applications, working websites with Squirrel implemented in it. So how does Squirrel work? Squirrel uses an application on the user's device to kind of act as the authentication method. So a bit like using your thumbprint to log into applications. It's another form of that kind of login, but it removes the need for the user to have more than one password, whilst also giving the appearance of having more than one password to each individual website, which is best practice. So you should have a different password for every website you go to. Hope you all do, but not generally the case for the general Joe out there. So there are two ways you can use Squirrel. You can either have it on your laptop or your main device, click a link and log in, or you can take another device, take a picture, or well, show it a QR code, and log in. We'll see that in a minute. So that's where we're going to go now. So on my personal website here, this is my personal website. We are on a browser. We are in Firefox. We've got the login link for Squirrel, QR code, and then we've got other auth logins, forms, authentication login. So we're going to do the impressive bit first. I'm going to log in to this. I'm going to log this website on this laptop in using my phone. So no magic, just opened up the Squirrel application on my phone. I'm going to press this. I'm then going to show it the QR code. It's then going to ask me to put in my Squirrel password, which is the password for this device. It wants me to put the log one in, so that's fine. So it's then going to go off and decrypt some stuff that's on this device. It's going to communicate with the server. It failed, but that's okay. I just got the password wrong. So it's authenticated on the device. This should go off and refresh. If it doesn't, I will refresh the browser. It's just got a bit stale, which we'll talk about in a minute. So I'll do this one more time. Live demos, don't ever do them. Right. So we've got a new QR code here. So I'm going to log in. So there is no smoke and mirrors. This is working. So it's authenticated, and I'm logged in. That was all I had to do. Like, it looked a bit harder than it should have done because of technical issues I had there, but we can do it again. So I can log out. I can go to go to the login page again. I can take a picture of the QR code, which I'll just do from the screen. It's a bit easier, supposedly. Come on. Fine, we'll do it from the big one. There we are. So I will put my password in one more time. Logged in again. Super easy for the user. All they need is the app. They can just go AMP, log in, easy. They only need to know one password. And once they've entered it once, the app will remember that you've entered it once, remember it for a little bit of time, which is configurable for this particular app. I didn't write this one. And then it'll only ask you to put in the first 4 characters, which is in the spec, of the password. So you only need to know the first 4 characters of your password most of the time. Every now and then you'll have to put in your longer password, but that's again up to you what you have. But the password is never sent to the website. So my website never gets your password. It only gets certain bits of information that it needs, yet it is still secure. What we can also do is we can sign out again, and we can sign in. But this time I'm going to click this link. So this is a HTML link. I'm going to enter my password. So just as before, logged in. That might feel a bit weird to do that on a laptop. You could do it on a phone as well, and that would open up the application I had on my phone. But we've just logged in using Squirrel 4 or 5 times there within the space of a few minutes, without sharing any information about myself with the website. This one's going to know it's me, but like, that leads us on nicely to why is it good for the user? So there are several key things it's good for the user for. These are the ability to not be tracked. So because the website doesn't have to know anything about who you are, so you don't need to register. You could literally go to my website now, log in with Squirrel, and you'd be logged in as an anonymous Squirrel user. You wouldn't be able to do much, but that's down to my roles and permissions in that website. Now, there's nothing to say that you can't ask a user to then register their information, but there's nothing to tie that user to different websites. Unlike OAuth, or SAML, forms of authentication kind of falls into the same category as Squirrel with that one, but OAuth and SAML, those systems, when you log in with Facebook or Google, they know which websites you've authenticated with or used Facebook to log in with, or Apple, so they know where you've been, and they can then use that data to advertise to you, like change search results for you, other things like that. So they know what you've been looking at. Whereas Squirrel then turns that on its head and says, you own that data, you can choose where you go, and there's no information like email address that you have to provide to be able to log in. Secondly, freedom from passwords. Users hate passwords. Users hate having to have multiple passwords. Squirrel gets it down to you only need one password, and you only need the first 4 characters. And that's really good for users. It's good for their security because Squirrel provides that multiple identifiable kind of information of a password being different per site, whilst only allowing the user to have one password. It's really good for them. They don't have to care about managing passwords or having a password manager, and how secure is their password. They just need to worry about how secure their device is. And generally, you're going to use Squirrel on your phone, it's pretty secure. Trust no one stance. So Squirrel and Steve Gibson, the inventor of Squirrel, is very keen on trust no one. This means the TNO standard. This means that you do not trust anyone. You barely trust yourself to keep it secure. You don't give anyone any information that can't be public. Squirrel does everything in public, bar what happens on the device that you own with the Squirrel application. So as long as you trust your Squirrel application, you can log into a website or have a user log into your website, and the security is as secure as that device is. So you probably wouldn't use Squirrel on a library computer that had one login, but you would use it to log into your bank maybe, or like any other website that you were interested in logging into that supported Squirrel. That would be secure, and nobody could track you doing that. But even if they did capture the database of the bank, all right, the bank's probably not a good idea there, because then they got other information. But if they only got the user table, they wouldn't get anything like passwords. They wouldn't have like the issue of password leaks that we have today. And finally, it's a simple way to log in. You can just whap your phone out, snap the QR code, enter that password that you just know, and then you're in. You're off running. Like, no fuss, and you don't even need to register. You can just, like, the way Squirrel's developed, the way most people implement Squirrel, you don't need to register before you log in for the first time. When you log in, they may ask you for some information, like, what's your email address so we can contact you about things? Do you want like security questions and things like that? But like, that comes down to the individual application's implementation. So we're going to do a bit of a deep dive now into how all this works. I won't spend too much time on this, don't worry. If you really want to know the ins and outs, I will point towards the spec later on. But the idea is that for the average application developer, there's some packages out there that you can just implement, and you get Squirrel for almost nothing. So we've got our user, we've got their computer, and we've got the application server. There's also a database, but we can't see this yet. So the user navigates to the login page. So my website, for instance, we navigate to the login page. So what happens when you do that is the web server goes off to the database and stores this thing that's called a nut. Squirrel, nut, goes quite nicely. The nut is a unique number or unique sequence of characters, cryptographically safe, random, and never repeating. This allows for this first nut is used in certain bits of the process to allow you to check if they're authenticated. So, for instance, here on this page, right now, it's always polling to see if the nut that's encoded in here has been authenticated by an external device. And that means that when this device does authenticate that nut, or preceding nuts, it then logs you in. So there's a bit of polling going on in the background, but that's nothing too major. And in the way that this is implemented, that's configurable at the back end. So the nut's stored in the database. That's the key thing to take away from this. So then the application server builds the HTML for the login page, sends it back to the user. The user's happy. They're like, cool, I got a login page. That's all I needed. And because they're using the computer, they're just going to click the link. That link, so the login page is built up of two things, a QR code and a link. The link takes this format, so we've got squirrel, SQRL, ://, so we replaced HTTP or HTTPS with squirrel, like you do with FTP. So it's a new protocol. Then the host name, path, question mark, the nut, this is the random nut that you were given from the server, and maybe a cancel, which is used by the client to send users back to if they cancel out the application, the Squirrel application, it sends you back to another page. Maybe refresh the login page. That's up to you. So for instance, we've got the example.com. They don't actually have a Squirrel implementation, but so don't go to this, but /squirrel, then this is not what a nut should look like, but it's an example. So we've got nut 0000. a cancel, which is a base64 encoded URL. And then the QR code for this or any other website would be this link encoded into a QR code. So the user's happy. They're like, cool, I've got my login page, and I click my little squirrel login button. What happens at that point is JavaScript sends off a request to get an image, and it's doing it to localhost 25,519 is the port number for the Squirrel client. This request is done to wake up the Squirrel client, so on like laptops or phones specifically. The applications go to sleep or in sleep mode. By making this request, we wake up the client. It's then awake. It responds with a 1x1 pixel image just to tell JavaScript, yep, we were able to contact the Squirrel client. This person has a Squirrel client. We're going to continue with the Squirrel login process. Once it's confirmed that the Squirrel client is open, we're then going to make a request to the Squirrel client. Now this is going to make a request with the base64 encoded Squirrel link to the local host. So this sends a message, sends a request off to the Squirrel client. That request stays open. Got to remember that because it's going to be important later on. So that request is still open. We haven't closed it. The web server has not responded to the request. Okay. So, and we sent it the Squirrel link. So the client uses that to then communicate with the server, which we'll now see. So our little Squirrel application on the laptop or desktop sends, using that base64 encoded URL that we just sent it, in that other request that's still open, it makes another request. That then communicates with the Squirrel server. It does about 3 or 4 messages, 2 minimum, to authenticate the user. We're going to look at those messages in a bit when we look at the format. So after a bit of back and forth with this, the client is told, yep, this user is now logged in. The server believes the user is logged in using that first nut that was originally given, kind of keeps track of that state, returns the login URL back to the client. The client then sends a redirect back to the browser on that original request that was set up over here. So then the browser magically gets redirected by the client using just standard redirect, 301 redirect, 302, to the URL that the server told it to send back. And happily, the browser then gets redirected. Generally uses the first nut as a what we call a CSP token, but there are other ways of doing that. You could have a completely new token generated that then relates to the first nut for other reasons, and then that logs you in. So at that point, the browser makes a request to the server, gets a login cookie, and you're logged in as if you'd logged in using forms, authentication or OAuth. So our user's now got a phone or tablet of some form. So we're going to do the other login system. This won't take as long. So the user opens up the Squirrel app, points it at the login page, gets the QR code. The QR code is then decoded. Then the Squirrel application has the URL that it needs to send a request to. Sends a request off to the server. Server then responds, does the authentication stuff that I was talking about, that we haven't seen yet. It then stops at that point. Once the application's been told everything's logged in, it's okay, goes back to its first screen. And the browser, using that polling method I was talking about, polling with the first nut, keeps polling the server, so they've done this a few times while the application was, while we're still doing this bit. As the polling goes on, when it returns through whatever method it does, that the application is logged in. So this is generally done with a true and false JSON response. It then returns, yep, the user's logged in. sends it a redirect and redirects to the correct place using the CSP or the first nut to then log in a user. And you get an authentication cookie and you're logged in. So we're going to take a bit of a deep dive into the message format now, which will hopefully answer some of the questions that get raised when you think about how is Squirrel actually doing this, and a bit more information about how the messages are built, which you won't need on a day-to-day basis, but if you're having to debug a Squirrel login, you may need to have an understanding of. So all Squirrel messages have a very common format, going from the client outwards. So the Squirrel client sends messages to the server with a client, server, and IDS key. So when you submit a form on a HTML page, it serializes the data into key pairs. Squirrel clients use the same format. So the client has, this client key has lots of other keys inside of it that has key information about the client. The server has either the base 64 encoded version of the URL, the Squirrel login URL from many slides ago, so this thing, it would have this encoded into it, or it's going to have the information that was sent back by the last request to the server, and that's useful for verification that you're still talking to the same server, and the server knows what it sent last, so it can be like, yep, that was me, that's what I sent, I'm happy. And the IDS, which is a signature of these two concatenated and base 64 encoded, it's a security measure to make sure that the contents of this has not changed, and that signature is signed by something that's inside the client, which we'll get to in a minute. It's a very important thing. So inside of that client key, we have three non-optional keys. Ver, which is the version, Squirrel. At the moment, that will always be 1. As the protocol advances and as things get added to that protocol, that version will increase. It's a whole number at the moment. As we go further forward in the protocol, that may change to be a decimal or a float. Then we've got CMD, which is the command. I'll come back to command later on. There's a couple of commands you can send to the server. It tells it to do certain things. And this is around like account management and sort of things. IDK, this is the key one. This is the user identifiable key. So this is the user ID. This is effectively what you would think of actually as the password for a user. If you can know this key, anyone can know this key, because everything's public. So even if this got leaked, it wouldn't matter. So even if your database with all your user IDKs stored in it got leaked onto the web, hackers got it, you wouldn't mind, doesn't really matter. Well, it does a little bit, but there's processes and things you can put in place to make that absolutely no worry. Because they have to know, they have to have your Squirrel client and your Squirrel password to actually make this work. So that's the really cool thing about Squirrel. You don't need to worry about managing users' passwords. In the Squirrel client section, you can also have these optional keys, and I won't focus on these too much. There's option, which is OPT, BTN, which is a option that's used in a particular type of response to a bit that the client and the server can do. PIDK, which is the previous identity. So when I was talking about if the ID keys were lost, that could be used there, but PIDK is also used if the user decides to change their password inside the Squirrel client, then their IDK changes. The client should, doesn't have to, but should, for usability purposes. Remember, the past keys suggested in the protocol, not fully formalized yet, to be about 5 back. And then the server can ask you to send a previous key, and it will keep going until it finds a key that it knew about. If not, then find you a new user. And then we'll manage that how you want. IDS, or INS, which is an index secret key. This is used to kind of verify that, the public key. And then we've got another one with P in front of it, which is about using the previous key, so you can check that as well. We won't worry about these too much, they're not important for this talk. They are important in the protocol, but yeah, they're not important for this. The two that are important here are the suck and the book. So server unlock key is used when you send a particular command. So there's 2 commands you can send outside of the normal authentication process. You can send, I think it's disable, disable, which locks the user's account, so the user can request that their account is locked. So if they feel like their Squirrel client has broken or has been hacked and their Squirrel identity has been stolen, they can send your server, lock my account, don't let anyone log in with Squirrel. I'll come back in a bit and sort that out. So you can just literally go through all your Squirrel login sites and go lock them all. Then verify user unlock key. This one is used to unlock an account. So we have 2 keys, one for locking and one for unlocking. And then this unlock key is used to verify a signature that we get later on, which we'll see in a second. So back at this level, these are the required things that should be sent at the top level of a client message. And don't worry, there's a bigger example of what these look like in a minute. We've got the PIDS, so that's the IDS signed with the PIDK. So it's just using a separate key to sign the message, the old key that you used to have, rather than the new one, just so that we can verify that everything's okay with that key. The URS is used when you're unlocking your account, and this is how we verify that the key that we have on the server matches the key that the client has. And this is using public key cryptography for all this signing stuff. And I could give a whole talk on public key cryptography, and I won't. So if you don't know about how public key cryptography works, it's magic. And if you do, then you'll maybe understand, and we can have a bigger conversation in the pub later about that. From the server side, the server messages are quite small, which is really good for the server because it means you're efficient, you're not losing too much bandwidth, your application costs go down through this. So we send the version, the client and the server have to agree on the version of Squirrel they're using. At the moment it's always going to be 1, so it's really easy. We've got the nut, which is always sent, so we always generate a new nut between every request that the server responds to from the client. It generates a new nut. We don't ever want to repeat nuts. These nuts should be very long, hard to guess, and cryptographically safe. Then we've got the TIFF, which is a flag that says the status of the response says that the user is okay to continue. There's lots of different TIFF statuses. It uses a hex bit code to respond. There's things like ID match, IP match, because we check the IP in certain circumstances of the user. But there's also things like command fail, and other bad error state management stuff. And then we've got query, which is the URL that when the client next responds, it'll send messages to. Most implementations of Squirrel on the server don't really change this URL. It generally goes to the same thing. But there are instances, even the early PHP versions that the Squirrel community had, it did send it off to a certain PHP file, depending on whether or not you'd logged in or not. URL is, so these are some optional ones, again, that the server could send back. URL, this one is used when the user has been logged in, so this tells the client where to redirect when the user is logging in with one device. Uses that to redirect the browser to a particular page. Can, which is used when they cancel the application, again does a redirect, because we've got that open connection that we can redirect through. Sin isn't really important for right now, but it's just used to ask the client to for that the PIN and INS. It allows you to seed that. Won't worry too much about that. We've got suck. So this is the server unlock key that we have locally on the server. So what we have stored against that particular user IDK, we then send back to the client, and it can do some things around saying, "Yep, right, that's okay. I can use that in some of the client side stuff." And then we've got ask, which is used to ask the question of a user. So it brings up a dialog in the application on the Squirrel side, and it asks them to like verify a question, and you can have up to 2 buttons in that dialog, and then BTN from the client. If we go back to that bit, so BTN in here is the button, is the number of the button that you clicked in the client. So we can ask you questions. The OAuth implementation of Squirrel, so there's an OAuth site for Squirrel that exists, so you can integrate Squirrel into your application using OAuth. That uses the ask functionality to say, is this the application you want to log into? So the website doesn't actually do that anymore. We've passed that on to the guy who's managing the OAuth server. Asks the user, is this the application? Is this the permissions you want to give it? In that dialog, rather than doing it on the website, which could be vulnerable to traffic interception and things like that. So by doing it in the Squirrel client, we've got a bit more control over it not being intercepted. So this is some top level, kind of very basic login message back and forth. So the client sends off a message to the server. In here we've got the version is 1, the command is query, the IDS, and this is a proper IDS. So we send this random looking string off to the server, and then we've got the URL that it used and this non-standard nut. I've done this for a reason, we'll see that in a minute. IDS, so this is the actual IDS of this message signed with this key. On the server side, it gets this message, it validates the IDS. So we look at this and we say, is it signed with this key? Yeah, good. Then we look at the user using the IDK. So we go to our database and we go, or our data store, wherever we're storing our data, and we go, cool, do we have a user with this ID? Yes or no? And if you do, then good. Then you can generate a new nut, because this was only a query, so we're seeing if this IDK exists in the user database. So at that point, we can respond with a TIFF that says ID match, maybe IP match if you're doing the same device login. It will then respond with those 2 TIFFs, which then tells the client. So here we go. I thought I had this. So yeah, we've got it sends back this message if the IDS matched the IDK. So we send back a message with a second nut. TIFF of 5. This bracket bit wouldn't be here, but I'm just explaining what these are. So ID match and IP match, and then the query to go back to the Squirrel URL with the second nut, which is the same path that we went to originally. So the client then does some things around checking if the TIFF is ID match, because we care about that, and maybe also the IP match, because it's the same device and we know we're doing the same device login. Then we create a new response and send that off to the path that was given to us. So that second request that we make is of version 1. It's a command of identify, or ident. And it has this IDS again, IDK, sorry, again. In the server, we've got that message that the server just sent us. So it's this again. So we won't focus on that. And then the IDS is, again, all of this concatenated and then base64 and then signed. So again, in the server, we validate the IDS. We look up the user and generate a new note. Server has a really easy job with Squirrel. So then the server responds again, a new note, the same TIFF, because, yep, nothing really changed. And then the Squirrel, and then the client checks the TIFF, checks the IP match, and the ID match are there, redirects the user's browser. So using that open connection that we always have, we're in the same device login, we redirect the browser, and then the user is logged in. So the commands that we have, we've seen query. So this is used to check if the user ID exists in the system. Can do other things like ask for the SUC from the server. In query as well, the server can also ask, do an ask response, so it can say, client, show the user this message with these buttons. In ident, they send the user's IDK, maybe the response to the ask message, and that's about all ident is used for, but it's used to effectively finish off the login process. The other things that Squirrel also provisions for is disabling an account. So we talked about the fact that you can unlock an account and lock an account. This is useful, especially if you're integrating Squirrel with existing sites that already have other login methodologies, like forms or OAuth. You can say, I only want to disable the login of Squirrel for this user account. They can log in using forms still. That's okay. So you can send a disable, and then all Squirrel logins disabled for that user, ideally, what the spec says to do. Then there's enable, so that's the unlock. So when you unlock an account, you've got to enter in what's called a rescue code. So the client has a really long number it gives you when you create an identity in the client. I didn't show the creation of an identity. If you search for Squirrel, you'll see lots of videos on how to do that. So yeah, enable tells the server, we're going to unlock the account. It has the client do some extra things, send some extra detail, do some extra bits. So it helps with the security. There's also remove, so you can also remove the fact that you can log in using Squirrel from the server. The server should remove all trace of that Squirrel login. So it should ideally remove the IDK from the user database, but that's down to the server's individual implementation of how they respect remove. So there are a few other things you can send in the option. So I don't know if you can remember, we kind of skipped past it a little bit. But in the message from the client to the server, you had this opt thing you can send, which is tilde separated, squiggly character. So you can have many options that are sent to the server, and the server does certain things, so we're going to go through those. So we've got no IP test. So for instance, if I was using my phone to log in, the client, if I'm scanning a QR code, it's going to send the no IP test to the server. It tells the server not to check the IP address that you've associated with the first note against the current IP address, because I may be on cellular, maybe on my phone's data rather than the Wi-Fi that my laptop's on. For instance, so if those IP addresses don't match, then if this wasn't sent, it would fail the authentication because the server's like, whoa, 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 whoa. How can you be in this IP address and this IP address at the same time? That doesn't work. So there's a bit of security that we're kind of turning off with this. Squirrel only, if this option's included. So when we log in with Squirrel clients, there's some options in the Squirrel client. You can say, always send this. And this tells the website that any other authentication that the user uses generally should be disabled and not be allowed to be used. And the user should always have to use Squirrel to log in. So this is kind of Squirrel saying, right, I'm going to be the only authentication the user uses. So if you've got forms authentication on your website, for instance, and you want to respect this option, you don't have to, it's optional, then your users can send this and say, I'm only going to use Squirrel to log in from now on. Anyone comes in with my username and password, ignore it. Doesn't matter. Hard lock, this is used to, say, disable security questions. So on a lot of websites, and using forms authentication for password recovery purposes, we say, give us your first pet's name or your mother's maiden name and things like that. And whether or not you answer that truthfully or not is a question for another day. But the hard lock says, don't allow that to happen anymore. Password recovery should be turned off. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. CPS, this is used to say whether or not the server should be responding with a CPS token, which is used when you want to look up on a redirect. When you've got that same device login, when you do the redirect, it's used to say, we're going to use this token to authenticate a user properly by giving them the cookie on that last redirect request. And CPS says that the server should respond with that kind of URL. Otherwise, it will just send back something else. This CPS is sort of ignored by the server depending on how it knows you're logging in, but yeah, it sometimes has to guess if you're logging in with the same device or not, and generally assumes that you're not logging on the same device if it doesn't receive CPS. SUC, so the client can send the SUC option, which sends return me the server unlock key. So at any point, the client can request the server unlock key from the server. But there are certain commands that, like the disable command and the enable command, will automatically send back the SUC generally. Query arguably should as well, but that's down to the server's implementation. So, now you've learnt all that, you can forget it, because there are lots of packages out there to help you with Squirrel. From a .NET point of view, I have written Squirrel for Net, which is a NuGet package that you can bring into your project, enter some values into your ASP. This is a web project thing. So into your ASP startup.cs file, it's a bit of middleware that you can then enter some properties into, and you'll get Squirrel for all of about half a day worth of work, providing all goes well. This is a bit of a screenshot of my personal website's setup for Squirrel. So I've got a .NET application, .NET Core application. So turned on authentication, I've got my normal forms authentication stuff here, which is just setting up the cookie really. And then we've got the Squirrel setup. So there's a few methods that I've implemented. I've implemented the create user, which is just an event that gets fired by the middleware that says a user should be created. This is optional. You don't actually have to allow users to be created. You can just say only existing users can log in. You'd have to have them have already logged in with Squirrel, so not so useful at the start, but then once you've got all your users migrated on using Squirrel, that could be quite useful to remove. Then you can turn off registration. User exists, so that one's required. Allows us to look up against the database whether or not the user exists, so you can write your own code to look up if the user exists or not. Update user ID, so that allows you to update the IDK that you've got stored in your database. And then you can, if they change their IDK by changing their password in the Squirrel client, then that will get fired, and you'll be able to update that without having to worry about all the Squirrel protocol stuff that you have to do to verify that that's a valid update. Just fires that. When it's fired that, you can guarantee that that has been checked fully, properly, incorrectly, and you can just update it. We've got remove user, which is, again, you're just going to remove the fact that they can log in with Squirrel, so you can do whatever you need to do in your data store. We've got lock user, unlock, get the suck and get the book. The book you don't ever send out to the user, back to the user's client, but the middleware does need the book from the user that originally, when you create a user, it gets given the book. So we need to be able to get that back out of your database. So we've got this event here that allows the middleware to kind of just pull that back out of the database and use it for verification purposes later on. So there isn't just .NET support for this. Very early on, WordPress got Squirrel Login. First commercial product that really got Squirrel Login. There was some demo versions of it. Squirrel Login's out there before this, but WordPress, there's a plugin. You can just click one button and run. Guys who work on this stuff are really nice. They're really good at fixing bugs and things, and really good at support. The Drupal, 8 support is there, 9 is coming. It's a module. I don't know much about Drupal. You can include it. OAuth, so there's an OAuth site. This actually uses the .NET Core package that I've created underneath the hood, but allows you to integrate OAuth. So if you already support OAuth in your applications, this is just another OAuth service that you can integrate with, but then users can use Squirrel out of the box and log in. Obviously this comes with the issues that OAuth gives, where technically the site could track all the Squirrel logins that you log in with, and we could figure out which sites you'd logged in using OAuth, but guy running this, not that interested in that, he just wanted to run some cool stuff. Node.js, so if you've got a Node.js website, you can include this, and there are so many more packages being developed even right now. As we speak, there'll be somebody working on Go, Rust, whatever, any web programming language you can think of. Somebody will be working on a Squirrel implementation. And a lot of this development happens right now at squirrel.grc.com, which GRC is Steve Gibson's company's website, and where most of the Squirrel community hangs out. So Squirrel clients. So you've seen me use 2 of the Squirrel clients today. GRC's client is the one that's on my laptop, and Jeff Arthur's iOS one is for the iPhone, and Daniel Pearson's Android app is the one I was using on my phone. And very recently, Joe C. Gomez has been creating a cross-platform .NET Core 3 client that's going through beta testing right now. It may even just pass beta testing, I don't know. He's literally been working through it very quickly this month, last month and this month. It's coming up, be out there. I saw some things in GitHub today about them testing Mac and Linux, so they're getting there, and you'll be able to use that for all your desktop devices. If you want to know more about Squirrel, there's the spec at grc.com/squirrel. There's some very deep dive into the Squirrel specification, like all the there's 4 documents on that website. There's 2 talk videos by Steve Gibson on Squirrel, so if you really want to get really deep knowledge on Squirrel, you can watch those and read those documents. You'll probably need to read the PDFs about 4 times before you understand half the stuff that's in there. It's very complicated stuff. It gets really far into the cryptography side of it, which is good. The Squirrel dev group, we all hang out at the GitHub/Squirrel dev. Nice and easy to find. And then we've got the Squirrel Foundation, which at the moment I'm currently in the process of building this website, so there's not much there. At the moment, I think there's an advertisement for a design competition that we're running. We were looking for people to design our website. So I'm currently in the process of building this website with an API first kind of model. That's going well, but we'll see. So yeah, we're going to probably be moving away from grc.com at some point for most of this. We'll be taking that data and putting it into the Squirrel Foundation. And if you want to get involved with the Squirrel community or just ask questions, shout at us for doing things wrong, and then we'll have a good friendly discussion about why we think what we've done is actually secure and right. You can obviously go to the squirrel.com, squirrel.grc.com for now. That's a forum where there's lots of posts and things. Really good community, really friendly, really helpful. If you want to join the Slack, the Squirrel Foundation.slack.com is a good workspace. Message me if you want a join link for that, because at the moment it's private. Or you can go to here and there's some join links on there if you find my post about Squirrel Foundation. And then there's Twitter. We don't post anything there quite yet, but once we've got the foundation up and running, you'll be able to follow us at squirrel_foundation. Thank you for staying awake. Are there any questions? I hope there's no questions, because that was a very quick talk. There was a lot of information there. If you want me to go back to any slides, let me know.
I've got one question. So you know this Squirrel server?
Yeah.
Is that a central location for everybody, or is that just your own hosted one?
So yeah, ideally each web application would have its own server, but it could be a centralized server for that application. So if you've got a distributed application, you could have multiple SQL servers. Squirrel servers. Very easy to get SQL and Squirrel mixed up. You'll do that a lot. Yeah, you'll have many. You maybe have multiple Squirrel servers available, depending on how much traffic you have coming in. If you're somebody like Microsoft, you may have 3 or 4 of them distributed across several different data centers. But that comes down to how you manage that. And the .NET Core package would actually help you with managing that kind of load balance. So in the setup of here, this is a very basic version of the setup. There are some other events you can hook into around NUT management. So this package allows you to actually control the generation of NUTs. So you can distribute that to an Elasticsearch, a cache, like Redis or something. You could have that be where you store your NUTs, and you can manage the creation and storage of NUTs yourself. So you could have multiple web applications looking at one store for Squirrel NUTs and verifying those as well. And so you can get really granular control. At the moment, if you left it like this, it would do it in memory. So all the NUTs would be stored locally in memory, and if your application happened to restart in the middle, you'd lose your NUTs. But that's not a major issue, because then the user just has to do another login. It's not majorly painful. It's not great, not ideal for the user, but so yeah, there's the fact that it's stored in memory, but generally your .NET application isn't going to restart too often, unless you tell it to, or it gets to the refresh time in IS. If you're running on other technologies like other server technologies you can run .NET Core on, it may refresh off more often. But we haven't had any issues. Like I say, we've got the OAuth implementations running with this package. The WordPress one uses PHP underneath, obviously, for WordPress, and that does a very similar thing in memory, but you can also store in the server. So yeah, it's not a centralized server. So it's not like OAuth where you're going to Google or Microsoft or Facebook or somebody and saying, this is my client secret and my client ID and things like that, and saying, authenticate my user for me. It's like it's almost like the user is the authentication system. So the user's device is the OAuth server, and your Squirrel server is actually the client. So we kind of flipped everything on its head and gone, the server doesn't know anything, the client knows everything, all the secret stuff. The secret stuff never leaves the client, and the server only can verify what the client says using the keys. Does that make sense? Cool. Does that make sense to everyone else? Good. Cool.
This is based on the fact that you are not sharing your main password with
Yeah.
the user, because
Yeah.
it's just one for everything, so it's kind of
Yes.
messing up the rule of security.
Yeah, so you only have one password, but that's for your client, and particularly in the client you have what's called an identity. You can have multiple identities in a client. So each identity has a password, but that password is never sent to the server. It sends the IDK, which is a key, and that key is generated using that password that you type in and some other information, but you can't reverse engineer that key into the user's password, or even reverse it into a user's identity. So the identity of it, what's known as the squirrel identity, is a very long, secure, random value that's stored in a file on your device as a user. But that random long key, random long value, is never sent to the server either. So only the key that's like the public side of the two keys of public cryptography that's sent to the server. There's actually a secret key or a private key that's kept locally and never shared. And to use those keys, you have to know the password. So there's a lot of security that happens within the client that I didn't really want to get into for this talk, because we'll be here until like 3 o'clock tomorrow morning. So yeah, like there is no password sharing. So because of that, it doesn't matter if the server provider loses the passwords. Not ideal situation for a Squirrel user, but not as worrying as if somebody like stole your password, especially if you had the same password on many sites, like most users do. So hopefully, if people use Squirrel, the days of massive password leaks of 50 million passwords being leaked onto the internet as even hashed values is worrying. That would be the day. That'd be no issue. You'd be like, fine. You wouldn't be bothered at all, really. You'd be like, fine. Maybe disable my Squirrel account or rekey or like what's called rekeying your Squirrel identity, which just changes the Squirrel password, and log in again, and all your sites would get that new IDK and be off and running again. Yeah.